Well, the more I travel around Orange, the more diversity I notice is around this place. Y'all noticed how diverse Orange County actually is? There really is a variety of people, races, cultures, social groups here. There's also a lot of churches around here. I'm sure you've noticed that. There's lots of churches around here. And a lot of the people that I bump into on a weekly basis are usually connected to a church in some sort of way. And in all that diversity, I think it's hard to know exactly who I should or who I shouldn't be inviting to church. Like, right? That's a complicated thing. Like, in so much diversity, who should I actually invite to church? Have you ever struggled with that too? Like, have you ever been standing in line at Kroger's, or have you ever been in a waiting room, maybe getting your oil changed in your car, or in a waiting room at the doctor's office, and you kick up a conversation with somebody, and you think to yourself, should I invite this person to come to church at Trinity this Sunday? I'm assuming that most of you have. I know I have. But when the thought occurs to me, like when I start to think, maybe I should invite this person to church, a lot of the time, I begin to talk myself out of it as well. I don't know about you, but I'm really good at thinking up a dozen reasons why I shouldn't ask them to church. Like, what if they think I'm a religious nut? I'm already a pastor. It's already awkward for me when somebody says, well, what do you do? I'm like, well, I'm a pastor. And you can immediately see him go, shields up, right? It's already weird for me. But I may think to myself, what if they think I'm weird? What if they stop talking to me? What if they do come? What if they actually do come and they don't like it? Have you ever had that dialogue with yourself in line at Kroger or in the waiting room at the doctor's? Well, today I want to help you the very next time that happens to you. The next time that you begin that inner dialogue, should I invite this person to church or not? The very next time you think that, I want you to remember the story of Cornelius in Acts chapter 10. So this story today that we're about to explore, remember this story the very next time you ask yourself that question, should I invite someone to church? This morning, as we work through the various parts of Acts chapter 10, keep that in mind. The question we are trying to answer today is, who should I invite to church? In my weekly comings and goings, who should I invite to church? And as we go along, we're going to try to develop a criterion that will help us answer that question. So as we work through the story, we're going to try to figure out, what is it exactly that I should be asking myself before I invite someone to church? So first, let's just get right into it. First, the criterion is not, it's almost easier to say what the criterion is not. The criterion is not, will they fit in? That's not the criterion for whether I should invite someone to church. Cornelius is a centurion in the Roman army. That's what Luke wants us to know about him. William Barclay, the commentator, says, the parallel to the centurion in our military organization is a company sergeant major. Anybody in the military before? Have you served in the military? Does that make sense to you, military people? That still doesn't really make sense to me, but that's what he is. He's a company sergeant major. Centurions were the elite military leaders of the Roman army. They were absolutely loyal to the emperor, which makes Cornelius's conversion all the more miraculous. If a centurion is absolutely loyal to Caesar, and you remember in this time they called Caesar Lord, and then all of a sudden he's claiming loyalty to Jesus Christ as Lord. This is pretty remarkable for any centurion to claim Jesus Christ. It's an interesting story. But in all of that, and who Cornelius was, The most important thing that Luke wants us to know is that Cornelius is not Jewish. That's the most important thing Luke wants us to know about this guy. He's Italian. He's a good man, but he is still an outsider. Christianity at this point was still very Jewish-centered. Despite his noble character, as good of a person as he was, a God-fearer, Luke says, despite all that, he's still a Gentile. He simply didn't fit in to this early Christian church. And that's the opinion of Peter as well. Peter is one of the leaders of this early church. Like, more than likely, that's Peter's opinion. Peter, like the rest of the church, still believes that the gospel is just for the Jews. That's where Peter stands. That is, until he has a vision. And in verses 9 through 16, we read about this vision. Read with me in Acts chapter 10, verses 9 through 16. This is Peter's vision. About noon the following day, as they were on their journey and approaching the city, Peter went up on the roof to pray. He became hungry and wanted something to eat. And while the meal was being prepared, he fell into a trance. He saw heaven open, and something like a large sheet being let down to earth by its four corners. It contained all kinds of four-footed animals, as well as reptiles and birds. Then a voice told him, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." "Surely not, Lord," Peter replied. "I have never eaten anything impure or unclean." The voice spoke to him a second time. "Do not call anything impure that God has made clean." This happened 3 times, and immediately the sheep was taken back into heaven. So that's the vision that Peter has. And now I'm sure I don't have to tell you this. Most of you have already grown up in church, right? If you grew up in church, you know it's true. The Jewish people had very strict laws about what food they could or they couldn't eat. And today we're going to read every single one of those laws. I'm just kidding. If you want to go read them, here's the 2 places that you can find them up on the screen. Leviticus 11, 1 through 47. So if you just like torturing yourself, you can go read these. Leviticus 11, verses 1 through 47. It's all about what food you could and couldn't eat. And then Deuteronomy 14, verses 3 through 20. Go read those if you're just a glutton for punishment. These 2 passages catalog all of the animals Israel was not allowed to eat. That list includes reptiles and birds of prey, 2 things specifically mentioned in Peter's vision. In Peter's vision, he saw all kinds of animals, including, it said, reptiles and birds. Barclay, the commentator, again is helpful. He says, generally speaking, so the real general here, you'll go read the list and there'll be some variations, but generally speaking, the Jews could eat only animals which chewed the cud, and whose hooves were cloven. All others were unclean and forbidden. All of that to say is the Jewish people had really strict laws about what food you could and couldn't eat. Certain food was considered unclean and impure, and only certain food was considered worthy of being eaten. But in this vision that Peter has, so in this very important vision that Peter has, suddenly all of those things that Peter would have considered unclean are made clean by God himself. All those things that Peter would have normally thought, these are unclean, you stay away from these things, suddenly God says, don't call anything that I have made clean unclean. He even sees the vision 3 times, perhaps that's Luke's way of saying that maybe Peter needed a little convincing, needed a little nudge, a little kick in the tail quarters, perhaps, by God. He sees it 3 times. One could say that this whole story in Acts chapter 10 is actually a double conversion story, that Peter also needed to be converted before Cornelius could be converted, but eventually he gets it. Peter eventually gets it because when those men Cornelius sent arrive, knocking on his door, Peter goes with them. And when Peter steps into Cornelius' house, he says this in verse 28. This is how we know that Peter understood the vision. Here's what he says to Cornelius when he walks into his house. You are well aware that it is against our law for a Jew to associate with or visit a Gentile, but God has shown me that I should not call anyone impure or unclean. The vision isn't exactly about food, is it? There's a double meaning to that vision. It wasn't about food. The vision was about people. And Peter gets it. God has shown me that I should not call anyone impure or unclean. That word anyone, does that leave out anybody? No, that includes everybody. And you know, sometimes I think we also need to be converted in this same type of way of thinking. Because if you're really honest with yourself, I'm transparent up here in the pulpit a lot. I know it's true for me, so I'll be transparent with y'all. Will y'all be transparent with me? If you're really honest with yourself, aren't there some people that you just kind of tend to think of as unclean, impure people? Like you see a particular people group, and in your mind, like all that does is bring up negative feelings or negative thoughts or negative, like honestly, don't we all kind of have a people group that just bother us? We see them walking around on the street and we go, man, what are they doing here? Why don't they just go back to where they came from? We have that with certain people, don't we? I know that I do. I know that I do. So I'm right there with you on that. So sometimes I think we need to be converted in this same kind of way that Peter is also being converted. People that you know just wouldn't fit in around this place. They don't belong here. They don't look like us. They don't act like us. And so the idea of inviting them, well, heck, the idea of inviting them is the furthest thing from our mind. It doesn't even cross our mind. In fact, we just get a little queasy looking at them at all. So let's do a little exercise today. I'm going to show us some pictures, some family pictures up here on the screen, and I want you to find the ones that are real prospect of our church and the ones that aren't. You tell me, there's one family in here that's a real prospect for our church. And I want you to find the one that's the real prospect of our church and the one that's not. Is that them? That's a good-looking family. Oh! That's my favorite. I want that family here. By the way, don't forget that our picture directory is coming up. While we're showing family pictures, Marty Dickerson will be waiting to meet you if you haven't signed up for your picture in the church office. The illustration has a dual purpose to it. Sign up for our picture directory. So which one of these families was the real prospect for our church? The answer, according to Acts chapter 10, it's all of them. That's the answer according to Acts chapter 10. But God has shown me that I should not call anyone impure or unclean. Race, social status, class, ethnicity, sexuality, gender, white, Asian, Middle Eastern, none of those things are the criterion for whether you should invite someone to church. That's just not the criterion. Baylor's Dr. David Garland hits the nail on the head when he says, how can one preach the gospel to those with whom one is unwilling to associate? The answer is you can't. You can't preach the gospel to somebody who you are unwilling to associate with. So you know what the best advice is? I was trying to think about this. What's the best advice I could give? Here's the best advice that I could give to you to help you with this particular issue. The best advice is to remember the song that you used to sing growing up in Sunday school. Sing it with me. Jesus loves the little children, all the children of the world. Red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in his sight. Jesus loves the little children of the world. It's a great song, isn't it? It'd be well for us to remember all the rest of our lives, not just in Sunday school. So the criterion is not, will they fit in? If you're out and about this week and you see somebody and you think to yourself, should I invite them to church or not? The very next thing you shouldn't think is, well, will they fit in here or not? That's not the criterion. Also, the criterion is not, do they look like they even need church? Do they look Christian already? That's not the question. Luke doesn't only want us to know that Cornelius is an Italian. It's not the only thing that Luke wants us to know. He also wants us to know that Cornelius is a God-fearer. He makes a really big deal out of the fact that Cornelius is a really good person. He wants us to know that about him. Scholar Ben Witherington points out that that term, God-fearer, is not a technical category. There's no real technical category of God-fearers. It could refer to a lot of different people. Witherington says that Luke uses the phrase, and others like it, to describe Gentiles who worship the true God and are, to some degree, adherents of Israel and Judaism. In other words, occasionally in this culture, there are some Gentile people who just got fed up with all the multiple gods. And they got fed up with all the immorality that came into worshiping these Roman gods. And they were just fed up with the whole thing. And when they looked at Judaism, they saw a religion that worshiped one God, a religion where the morals and the ethics of the people were solid and united, and there was something about that that attracted them. And so they didn't go all the way through with all the different laws of Judaism. For example, they didn't eat all of the food that the Jews ate. They didn't follow those food laws, nor were they circumcised. So they didn't do everything that was a part of the Jewish religion, but they believed in the one true God. And they tried to live by the morals of this one true God. And Cornelius was one of these Gentiles. He was pious. He fulfills Jesus' great commandment. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And he loved his neighbors as himself. He prayed constantly, Luke says. He gave his money to the poor. He was a moral person, a stand-up guy, a good old boy. It was probably difficult to distinguish his life from any other Jewish person's life. I think that's the key that Luke really wants us to take away from this. It was hard to tell him apart from any of the other Jews. He was a good person, and still, as good as he was, Cornelius still needed to be saved and baptized. I think that's really key about Cornelius. He even knew who God was. He had an idea of a God, the God, and Cornelius still hadn't met Jesus yet. Simply being good and pious Dr. Garland reminds us, simply being good and pious does not earn salvation. God had made Cornelius and all Gentiles clean, but that wasn't enough. Garland continues, cleanliness does not mean that a person is saved. It simply means that they cannot be automatically written off as beyond the pale. And I think that's really significant when it comes to the people we're reaching out to in our area. We encounter people every week whose lives mirror ours in almost every kind of way. Right? Like more or less, the people you bump into on a daily basis, how much different are a lot of their lives from yours? They have the same morals, most of them. They have the same values. A lot of the people you bump into are good people. They may even attend church every now and then, but some of these people still haven't met Jesus yet. Some of these people still need to be saved. When Henry Ford purchased a large insurance policy, the Detroit newspapers picked up on it and published it everywhere since the amount was so large and Henry Ford was so prominent. The story was read by one of Ford's oldest friends, who also happened to be in the insurance business. And so he went to Ford a little hurt and confronted him to see if the story was true. And when Ford told him that it was, the friend asked, well, why didn't you do your insurance policy through me? I'm one of your oldest friends. We've known each other for a long time. Why didn't you do it for me? I've been in insurance for many years. And Ford simply said, you never asked me. Sometimes that's all it really takes. You see, the criterion of whether we should invite someone to church isn't, do they look like they need church? I don't think that they do. They're a good person. Their lives look a lot like mine. What's the real difference? That's not the criterion. Ask everyone. Ask everyone, even if it's your closest friends. Even if it's one of your neighbors. Even if it's someone you know goes to church every now and again. Don't assume that just because they are good or just because they are living by the same moral standards that you are, that they know Jesus. Being good, being a good moral person, doesn't mean that somebody knows Jesus and is saved and are following Him. So that's not the criterion. The criterion is not, do they fit in? The criterion is not, do they look like us? The criterion is not, do they look like they're already connected to some church? Are they already a Christian? It's not the criterion. Lastly, the criterion is not, are we ready for them? The criterion is not, are we ready for them? The early church was obviously not ready to handle these Gentile converts. That early church was not ready for a mission of this magnitude. As soon as Peter had Cornelius' household baptized, this is what happens in Acts chapter 11. As soon as Cornelius orders them to be baptized, guess what? He's called back up to Jerusalem, and he's having to explain his actions. The boys back up at Jerusalem are not pleased at all with Peter, and he has to go up there and talk about it. And much later, in Acts chapter 15, the early church has to hold an entire conference, an entire church meeting with this one item on the docket. Are we going to allow Gentiles into the church or not? This is a big issue. The church wasn't ready to deal with it. They weren't ready to handle these new people. But you know who was ready? God. That's who was ready. God was ready to handle the situation. And here's the best thing about that. Here's the best thing about that. When God is ready to handle a situation, it means that you and I don't have to. Like, isn't that good news in some way? Like, if God is ready to handle a situation, It means that you and I don't have to worry about handling it. That's pretty cool, isn't it? We have a lot on our plate already. We all have busy lives already. Wouldn't it be nice if somebody handled all these hard things? And when God's ready to handle something, we don't have to handle it. And I think that's one of the best things that Peter learns. And when he begins to speak to these Gentiles at Cornelius' house, when he's there and introductions are made and Peter's trying to figure out why Cornelius called him here, here's how he starts his speech. Verses 34 through 36 of Acts chapter 10, Peter says this, I now realize how true it is that God does not show favoritism, but accepts from every nation the one who fears him and does what is right. You know the message God sent to the people of Israel, announcing the good news of peace through Jesus Christ, who is Lord of all. Really key part of the passage right there. Jesus Christ, who is Lord of all, no favoritism, accepts from every nation the one who fears him and does what is right. So up till now, all we've talked about is what the criterion is not. Are you ready to know what the criterion actually is then? Like, what is the actual criterion for whether you should invite someone to church? Well, it's exactly what Peter says in verse 35. Here's the criterion for whether you should invite someone to church. The criterion is, are they earnestly seeking God or not? That's it. Is a person earnestly seeking God with all their heart or not? That's the major criterion for inviting someone to church, for allowing people to come worship with us here on Sundays, for allowing people to join a Bible study class. That's the one major criterion. Are they earnestly seeking God? But here's the hard part about that. If that's the criterion, here's the hard part about that. You may never know. You may never really know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, if a person is truly seeking God with all of their heart. Luke says it point blank about Cornelius. Luke tells us directly that Cornelius is pursuing God earnestly with all his heart, but nobody else in your life has this omniscient narrator following them around, telling you if this person is a real prospect for the church or not. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? Like in Kroger, and then all of a sudden a voice is like, she was buying lettuce, but she was looking for so much more. But we just don't have that in our lives. Nobody else in our life has that. So you may never really know if this person you are about to invite to church is legitimately pursuing God or not, because you can't see within their heart. As smart and as clever as you might be, you cannot see what's really going on in someone's heart. It's a lesson that goes all the way back to the book of Samuel. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And I know, so as a pastor, I know that this is true. People come to church for a whole lot of reasons, right? People come to church for a whole lot of reasons. And sometimes I think our minds could be boggled by that and be really frustrating. Some of them are good reasons. Some people are coming to church looking for community. They're looking for friendship. They're looking for support, good programs, etc. Those are all good things, right? Those aren't bad things to go to a church for. Some of them aren't so good. Some people come to church for not good reasons. Church hopping. Maybe they're contentious in a past church. Maybe they're trying to force their view or theology on a church. Maybe they're trying to make some sort of statement, like I'm going to draw the line in the sand and join this church and show them what I believe. Those aren't good reasons. And so as a pastor, I understand it. I understand the temptation to act as a doorkeeper or a bouncer to the church holding up my little clipboard of who's in and who's out according to the Gospel of Ryan. It's a good book, by the way. Have you read the Gospel of Ryan? I think it's a really good book. But the Gospel of Ryan doesn't save. The Gospel of Jesus Christ does. And so it's not our job to decide if a person is ready to come to church or not. It's just not our job. Our job is not to go through some made-up checklist before we decide to invite someone. You know what our job is? Here's our job. It's really simple. Our only job is to cast the net as wide as possible. That's our entire job. Cast the net as wide as possible and be open to the possibility that God is the one leading and guiding and directing this person to Himself. That's it. That's your entire job. Cast the net as wide as possible and trust that God will take care of His own church. Tell everyone you meet about Jesus. Tell everyone. Invite everyone you bump into to church. Invite every single person. If Jesus really is Lord of all, as Peter says, if Jesus really is Lord of all, then that's all you have to do. Throw the net out there and trust that God is working in this person's life behind the scenes, that the Lord of all sees what's truly in a person's heart, that the Lord of all is leading these people to Himself. The criterion is not, are we ready for them? It's not the criterion. If God is ready to handle it, then we don't have to worry about it. The criterion is, are they earnestly seeking God? And you know what will happen if you do? Like, what will happen if I start casting that net wide and inviting these people? And what if we get some strange people in our church? And what if we get some people that really don't look like us? Or what if we get some people that just, they really aren't where our church is at completely, and they're a little odd? You know what will happen if you'll do that? Well, here's what could happen if you'll actually do it. If you'll do just that, when you throw the net wide and let God handle it, then maybe, just maybe, you'll get to stand back and really see just what God can do. Like, you'll get to see God at work. You'll get to stand back and be amazed at what God can do in a person's life. Just like all those other Jewish people that accompanied Peter that day. Did y'all notice that right there at the end? It said that they were astonished. That could be you. You'll have the honor and you'll have the privilege of watching in amazement as the Holy Spirit descends upon someone's life and transforms them forever. And you too will get to stand by in astonishment and say, wow. Wow. Just look at what my God can do. Will you pray with me?